Margot.
Anna, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you? Good.
We're living the dream right now over at the Jocko Wyman house. I have to say, it's all good. How have you been? It's been a while since we've been able to do this.
Yes, to be able to do this in person, but it's so exciting to be back with Mom to Mom, where one of the mom brings up all the problems and the other one, and you'll notice which way that arrow's pointing. The other mom is a licensed clinical psychologist. So I love the opportunity to bring real life issues. Some are my own issues. I've got one today that's from a teen, it's parenting teens under lockdown group, with just problems, challenges that people have because of the fact that we're all inside all the time with our families.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
uh, this one I think probably happens anyway, though. This is a parent talking about when you have to ask your child, teenage child, to, let's say, to take out the trash, and you've asked once, you've asked twice, you're on your third time, and at this point, it's starting to escalate a little bit, and it seems like you have to get to the point where you're shouting and threatening before they actually take the trash out. And
Yeah.
do you have any insight? How do we just not even get there in the first place? How can we break that cycle and have our kids help out around the house too?
Yeah,
Can you
that's
fix it?
sure.
Thank you.
I don't get my magic wand and yeah. But here, yeah, I do have a couple of ideas. So
Okay.
one idea is, or one thought
Mhm.
is, and this can be really hard to determine, is what is motivating your kid to respond in that way. At some points, it's just developmentally appropriate.
Oh,
And
what do
that's
you mean by that?
right. So
Yeah.
kids go through different developmental phases that are absolutely normal. They're to be expected. They
Mhm.
look different now than they did when we were kids. Believe me, I'm aware of that. So it might look like around 11, 12, 13, your child starts to push back at things that they didn't used to push back. They used to be really happy and you'd ask them to do something and maybe they would, be so excited because they get the gold star on the chart or something.
Mhm.
It was much easier to motivate them. Once they start hitting, that adolescent, just pre-adolescent phase, they are much more likely to start doing that pushback. And I would say it's somewhere around 12, 13 is typical, sometimes
Mhm.
11. And they're just going to start saying no, just no. And if we're not prepared for that, then we're going to start arguing with them. What do you mean no? I, this is a
Mhm.
reasonable request. You live in this house like everybody else. You make that
Right.
garbage, take it out. And it's very easy to get frustrated with kids because, especially if they're, I'll give you an example. My kids might be upstairs, for instance, playing on a video game. I have two teenage
Mhm.
boys. They're upstairs, they're playing on their video games. And it's time for dinner. And the very first thing, and I bet some of you have heard this as well, perhaps you have too, Deanna, although your son's a little bit older, but
Mhm.
Mom, I'm in the middle of a match. If I hear, Mom,
Oh.
I never hear that phrase again, that'd be fine. But it doesn't happen as much now, I can say, because my response is,
Oh.
okay, the Wi-Fi is going off.
Mm.
Well, Mom, no. Well, then get down here. So
Oh, so they're in the middle of playing a video game, which actually, as a parent, that one's hard because as a parent, you're probably thinking that's not important based on the scope of what we need to do right now. But is
well,
that fair to say too?
yes and no. So
Mhm.
here is a way to manage this. And
Mhm.
I really like the idea of at least once or twice, just sort of reminding my kids, I have a conversation in the beginning, like, look,
Mhm.
I get it. You're headed upstairs. Remember, when I say it's time for dinner, come downstairs. If you're in the middle of a match, I will give you 10 minutes. I will call you 10 minutes before dinner needs
Mhm.
to start, or I'll tell you 10 minutes before the
Mhm.
garbage needs to go out. I'm going to give you
Margot, that's like, isn't that what you used to do when they were like 3 and 5 though? When it was you were supposed to, like, if kids had trouble with transitions, you'd be like, "We're leaving in 10, we're leaving
Yep.
in 5." Isn't that
Mhm.
interesting? So even at like 13, 14, or as they get older, that is still similar, it sounds like.
Well, it is. Again, because kids don't have the motivation to do
Mhm.
these tasks. We are trying to motivate them to learn to do them. And we will have a conversation like, oh, why do I have to take out the garbage? Well, because you live in this house and you make it, please take it out. And that's
Mhm.
it. I mean, it's not a big argument. What do you mean? Why do you have to take it
Mhm.
out? Of course, it's just like, oh, because I do want them to understand why
Mhm.
they need to take out the garbage. But if I've
Mhm.
already told them a couple or three times, they know why they need to take out the
Mhm.
garbage or come down to dinner or do their
Mhm.
homework or clean up their
Right.
room or, whatever the heck it is.
Mhm.
It's not a newsflash.
We ran into, or as I always like to say when we're on live video, my friend had an issue
Right?
where they tied chores to allowance. And when the kid got older, it was an evaluative decision. It wasn't worth the $25 or whatever a week to actually take the trash out. And so then my friend was stuck. What do you do when you've built it, the whole thing's been predicated on this arrangement that they're like, yeah, we're done. We don't agree.
Hmm. And that can happen. And I'll tell you, there are plenty of kids. I see this with families
Mhm.
frequently where the kids, it could be something a kid really wants to do, and they'll say, I don't care. I'm not going to do this, even to get the thing I love the most in the world,
Mhm.
like video game time, because they're in either a developmental process where they're needing to push back, which we'll get
Mhm.
back to in a moment, or
Mhm.
there's something else going on. Sometimes, sadly, there is something emotionally that's going on with the kid.
Mhm.
They're kind of depressed. They don't feel like doing much, or they're really irritable and they don't feel like doing much.
Mhm.
I know how both of those can feel sometimes, right? Um,
Mhm.
it's not a good reason to not do it. That's a double negative. They still need to do it, but how you get them to realize they need to do it or to do it is
Mhm.
another story. But so the other thing is what's happening in their relationship with you.
Mhm.
And fortunately, for some of us, we're able to have good relationships with our kids. I'll tell you, it's like when people will ask somebody, "Well, how do you stay so thin? What's your secret?" And the answer is, "Well, I watch what I eat and I exercise every day."
Mhm.
It's like I do put in a lot of time and a lot of effort into the relationship, and that doesn't mean like fawning over them. It
Mhm.
means I pay attention to what's important to them. I talk to them about what's important to them. I give them space when it seems appropriate to give them space, but I am involved. And
Mhm.
I don't argue with them a whole lot because that really impacts the relationship, which is kind of to your point. So, how do you get them to do things without having to argue with them? The first thing is you as a parent have to make the decision that you are not going to argue with them.
Mhm.
And it sounds simple. I assure you, I can certainly have a little bit of a fiery temper. It's in me.
Mhm.
I've really trained myself not
Mhm.
to, but I can. It's in me. But
Mhm.
I have made a decision that I am not going to do it. Or let me say this: I'm strategic with it. So I save that level of emotion for something that really, really calls for it, that
Mhm.
really needs it as emphasis. And it's
Mhm.
not because I feel like popping off, no matter how stressed I am.
Mhm.
That's not useful. And believe me, I
Mhm.
get this. I'm busy. I have two kids with a lot of stuff.
Right.
So it's we do our best. I'm not always perfect with it by
Mhm.
any stretch. You can ask them on any given day, but this is the goal. Is I am
Mhm.
going to be clear. I'm going to lay out expectations and I'm going to have thought out in advance how am I going to respond when they say no? Not if, when. When
Mhm.
I get pushback
Mhm.
because adolescents do that.
Right.
That's what they
Well,
do.
I think sometimes we're talking about it's not even that they're saying no, they just don't do it. And I will say my poor friend who I'm throwing under the bus here
Right.
is the idea of that sometimes when it's, for example, the trash one, it'll be like, take out the trash. And I know in our case that each time I don't be like, I don't add things like, oh my gosh, take out the trash. I told you 100 times. I just keep going, take out the trash, take out the trash. And often with times you have to have the patience to still, I don't like to do it once I've asked. And so that's where my friend's spouse sometimes
Mhm.
like, that's it, I'm just taking it. I feel like you can't do that.
You
Like you
can't do
need to actually let them do it. And usually when it gets done, if it has been a couple times, is they're going out there. I'm going to go see my friend or we're about to eat dinner. And usually it's the one where it's like, oh, can you just take the trash out before we eat dinner? Or can you just take
yeah,
the trash out before you go see your friend? And so often it's that's where there's an immediate do this and then this, and that
right.
tends to get it. But you have to kind of stay calm to know that you do have to say it sometimes 3 or 4 times.
Well, and you might have to say it 3 or 4 times. And if you can be okay with that, that's fine. I tend to not like that very much.
Mhm.
Sometimes we do have to say it a couple of times. I
Mhm.
would I would decide what's my threshold. I have a
Okay.
threshold of twice.
Mhm.
That's me. I wouldn't go beyond 3 or 4.
I'm probably too much of an enabler, but that's
Well,
that's for another call.
for another call, right? I would say once or twice because that's sort of my patience level. Like,
Yeah,
you
sure.
hear me, I know you hear me. You just
Oh,
don't
sure.
stop what you're doing,
Mhm.
right? I get
Mhm.
that. Now, here's the thing. I don't like somebody to call me and ask me to immediately jump out of my chair and do something too,
Mhm.
right? But we think with our kids, we should be able to do that. Come take out the garbage right
We
now.
do. We do think we're the boss, and that's the age where they wanna be the boss now. That you talked about a minute ago when you talk about that struggle. Yeah.
Right. So
Yep.
therefore, again, if now sometimes I'm making dinner and I open up the garbage and it's like I
Sure.
can't put another thing in. But you know what I can do? I can pull out a plastic or a plastic grocery bag
Mhm.
and use that for a little bit of garbage for a minute and
Mhm.
walk over the stairs and say, "You have between now and 10 minutes to take out the garbage.
Mhm.
Starting now, I'm going to set a timer on Alexa. Now in 10
Mhm.
minutes."
Yeah.
Alexa just beeped. I don't know if you heard that. So I might do something like that.
Mhm.
Or if I know they're leaving, which they're not because it's COVID, but in normal times, if I know they're leaving to go somewhere, I might say, "Hey, on your way out, take the trash
Yeah.
bag out. There's this other little trash
Mhm.
bag." Because if I know they're doing something with their friends or they're in the middle of a match, I don't want
Mhm.
people to call me and expect me to hop to it.
Mhm.
Very little is required of us in that way unless you're going into the military or something,
Mhm.
or
Sure.
you're a physician running into an emergency. By and large, you can take a minute and finish what you're doing. If we
Mhm.
get beyond that 10 minutes, if they're just ignoring me, there is
Mhm.
no conversation. I walk over, I turn off their data, I turn off the Wi-Fi. If they have a friend over, and I've done this too, I've said, "Hey, either you do what I asked you to do or your friend's going home. Just
Mhm.
FYI." And I say it just in that tone of voice. That's it. And they know I mean it. And here's where a
Mhm.
lot of parents get themselves into trouble. They don't mean it. They're just trying to get the kid to do it. So the escalation is, I'm trying to get you to comply. Well, that's
Mhm.
a very different agenda than the garbage needs to go out, right? Because now you're refusing me, you're being disrespectful to me. Now, if you swore at me when I said that, God help you.
Mhm.
If you swore at me when I asked you to do it, if you said, I'm not, if you give me a bunch of attitude, I still don't quite frankly, I
Mhm.
care about, don't swear at me. Attitude, I don't really care about. I'm like, you
Yeah.
know what, it's your choice, but just know that this is
Mhm.
what's going to happen.
Margaret, talk about that a little bit more because I think that's what plays into these things that it becomes very personal for the parent. Especially you said when we started, you said it may not have been quite the same as it was when we were growing up, especially when they're used to this idea of like you just respected your parent because they were the parent and and you did what they said. So you've got a
Right.
parent with that mindset. And how can parents avoid it taking it personally? Because it sounds like you're saying it's just how their brain is. It's not personal per se, even though it's the two of you going at it. So how does the parent not take the bait and get into an argument where it's a personal conflict?
Well, that's it's mindset, and a lot of
Mhm.
parenting, from my perspective, is mindset. Meaning, it's the way I go in and think about it. Now, I own a therapy practice, so
Mhm.
I have to think about when I have something I need to accomplish. There's a strategy, there's a plan, there's execution. We don't think about that with parenting. We think it should just be off the cuff. I'm really planful as a parent. Here are my expectations. This is how I'm going to make sure that this happens. This will be my response when it doesn't, most of the time,
Mhm.
so that I go into it with a plan. And if I have a plan,
Mm.
I'm
Mhm.
using the thinking, executive functioning, planning, strategic part of my brain, not just the emotional part, because kids get the emotional part going in a heartbeat. Like,
Mhm.
boom, what do you mean no? And how can you? And our wicks get
Yeah.
shorter and shorter and shorter, and then everybody's frustrated and miserable. So again, not all kids do as well with this, but when they don't, there's typically other issues going on. And that's when you really need to contact somebody and maybe get some more help, or
Mhm.
contact a parent coach, or contact a therapist and just get some guidance about how to handle this with your specific kid. So if this doesn't apply to you, that's okay.
Mhm.
Everybody's kid is different. I'm just saying, generally speaking, these are some great ground rules, but your
Mhm.
kid might be different. Many kids, if you're planful about it, if you stay calm, if and before I
Mhm.
have to go into something that I know is going to be difficult, I don't, I may be really, but inside I say, all right, I need to stop. I need to take a breath,
Mhm.
calm myself
Mhm.
down. This is not about me. And that's my mindset that I walk in with. This is a teenage brain. My brain's up here, their brain's down here developmentally. It's
Mhm.
my job to stay, kind of in
Mhm.
this calm window
Mhm.
of
Well, and it
activation.
sounds like in the instance that you gave, which is great, is when you had your plan and knew what you could tolerate, your plan, at least in the one example we talked about, was I can wait 10 minutes. I can use a little plastic bag and put the trash until then. I'll set the alarm and then the Wi-Fi is going off. And so you had
Exactly.
that whole plan in your head before you went to the bottom of the stairs and said, "Hey, I need you to take the trash out in the
Right,
next 10 minutes."
right,
So
right.
that was good. And I think it's important, Margot, also, and you've sort of said this, but to remind parents, you may have to use that plan on Monday. And you know what? You're going to have to use that plan again on Tuesday morning because there's no continuity. You can't assume because it worked one day that it's going to work the next day. Like each day is so different. And there's not an accumulative effect of I'm going to remember now to comply with what you're asking.
Oh,
Right?
no, no, and developmentally, right, I mean, it's the opposite, right?
Yeah.
I like to have sort of a handful of
Hmm.
go-tos. Data is off, Wi-Fi is off, turn in your phone, take your Xbox. I mean, this is easier because my kids are gamers, so that's really sort of low-hanging fruit, even
Hmm.
in COVID. My one son, I don't take away things that are good
Hmm.
for them, like, skateboards, bikes, things that they can. I don't take away sports. That's not,
Hmm.
one's a football player. I never take away sports. Things that are good for them are not on the table. That's not necessary, and it's not good for them. So
Hmm.
I think, depending on the social, whatever the social event is, I might not take that away. But there's plenty of other things I can do. And that's where
Hmm.
I really hear parents get stuck, is I don't really know what to do. I don't know what to take away. They
Hmm.
say nothing means anything to them. And
Right,
sometimes,
when they say, "I'm gonna take your game box," and they go, "Fine, go ahead."
fine, go ahead.
Does the parent assume they're just saying that to be tough and still follows through with it? Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
And here's so yes, to your
Mhm.
question, yes, you go ahead and you just calmly take it anyway, and they may not take out the garbage, and then you're stuck doing it perhaps,
Mhm.
right? Or you can say, well, if you have a plan B for what you're going to do, like, well, your data is going to go off, your Xbox is going to be gone, but it has to be for a reasonable amount of time. And you can't say, well, I was going to
Mhm.
take it for a day and now I'm taking it for a month and you're not getting this thing back. Because then it's not constructive. It feels and is just because you're frustrated and it's punitive.
Mhm.
These aren't teachable moments, right? And to your point, you're
Oh,
not going to.
that's a good point. They're not that's a good way to phrase it. They're not teachable moments. We just really need to get this done. And one last thing, just along those lines, if you ever had a situation where, like, all right, I'm taking the Xbox, and then they physically tried to prevent you from it, that feels like a pretty intense. I just saw your eyes. I just saw what you referred to with that like temper. Your eyes just flashed. If that ever happened, is that a time where clearly something else is going on, or that you might want to get? I know there's parenting coaches. Is that maybe a
Yeah.
time that you might need that?
Yes, yes. Well, if your child gets to the point, and this
Mhm.
can happen particularly with video gaming, by the
Mhm.
way, because, and this is why, and that's a conversation for another time, but
Okay.
this is why making sure that the amount of time that is spent is broken up with other activities, even on a weekend,
Mm.
it doesn't
Mhm.
matter, because their brains can only tolerate so much production of cortisol and adrenaline
Okay.
and epinephrine, norepinephrine, all the stress hormones. You can only have so much of that. They're often doing some kind of battle. They're doing some kind of
Mm.
race. They're doing some
Mhm.
kind of challenge. And so the stress hormones in the brain are releasing. So stopping that all of a sudden would be like, I mean, I'm trying to think of something that's equivalent, but I mean, this doesn't even cover it. But let's say you were sitting in a movie theater and you're in the middle of the movie, and all of a sudden the screen goes down and the lights come up and they say, "Get out!"
Mhm.
You're going to like, what? It's
Right.
a shock to the system that then those are the times that kids seem to be like, well, what are you going to do about it?
Mhm.
What am I going to do about it? Or kids do now these days, and this is really scary, get up and physically posture in front of their parents.
Mhm.
Now, and I have worked with families where kids have laid hands on their parents in an aggressive way in these kinds of situations. Very
Mhm.
scary for the parent, and quite frankly, scary for the kid because
Mhm.
no kid wants to, let me rephrase that.
Mhm.
Most kids don't want to get to that point. They
Sure.
feel badly afterwards. They feel out of control. And so if the parent gets super, I'm calling 911 and blah, there's a
Mm.
lot that parents might feel that they need to do in that moment because they're scared. If that's happening, absolutely contact a parent coach, a therapist who will just do some guidance. It doesn't have to be
Mhm.
come in, talk about your childhood, tell me, it's really like, here's a situation, what do I do? Or if you have a
Oh,
good
how could I
friend,
handle it? Mhm.
how can I handle it? Or if you have other moms you can talk to, great.
Mhm.
Um, there are also, so we just hired this guy, and this wasn't meant to, I wasn't planning on bringing this up at the moment. I have been looking for a therapist whose expertise is video game addiction.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
The addiction is that kids will forego meals, they'll forego school, they'll forego relationships. They
Mhm.
are just in this world of all they can talk about, all they can think about. Most kids are going to have withdrawal when they get off of video games if they've been on
Wow.
time, and they're going to be snarky, which is
Mhm.
why I give my kids time. Right? It's very similar to when they were little, as you mentioned. When they're
Mhm.
little and they're having at 3, they're gonna have a temper tantrum. It's because they're so flooded, they don't know what to do with their
Mhm.
emotions. That's really what happens with video games. It can happen with social media posting too. So
Mhm.
it's like it's only video gaming, but it's more so with video gaming.
Mhm.
So, parents really have to make sure that if those sorts of things are happening where there's aggression, they get some guidance and maybe some guidance for their kid too.
Mhm. And one other question on that, because I know so many things are teletherapy now, and there's a difference between therapy and coaching. Can so I'm just wondering in terms of, let's say, the person that you have, and coaching can be done anywhere. I know teletherapy, you're licensed within specific states, but if someone's doing coaching, not covered by insurance, but you get great advice, and then that can be anywhere, correct?
Yeah, it can be
Okay.
anywhere. And
Mhm.
coaching can take a couple of forms. There are coaches who are trying to help you find your own internal answer that you always knew was there. And
Mhm.
sometimes coaches will just, they'll coach you and they'll say, go back in. It's the next quarter. It's like a coach. Next quarter, when you go in, this is the play. Give it a try. Let's see what happens. So,
Mhm.
so it depends on what you're needing. Do you need somebody to kind of help you develop a very specific plan, or someone who's going to be, at sort of a higher level
Mhm.
up here, kind of helping you figure out what it is you want. But most parents really just want some specific
Mhm.
advice about what should
Mhm.
they do. So yes, you can find coaches. There are parenting coaches, but you want to make sure it's a parenting coach, not a life coach necessarily, because parenting coaches hopefully are more up on the research about what's happening developmentally with kids and in
Mhm.
families. So that's really more what you're looking for. But I'm glad you brought that up because the difference between coaching and therapy, there's a diagnosis, there's
Mhm.
usually looking at the history of what's been happening. How did we get here? Coaching is much more about present day and problem solving.
Mhm.
So that it really just
Mhm.
depends on what the
And
person
it
is.
sounds like you need to, depending on how busy the coach is, you need to anticipate long enough ahead that you can get in, but it could also be a one-time thing. I have this one specific
Yep.
problem, so it doesn't necessarily have to be something long term.
Right.
Mhm.
I've done this frequently with parents. I'm not doing therapy, and I'm super specific about that. I'm not
Mhm.
doing therapy. therapy. I'm doing coaching, and I specifically do parent coaching. I don't
Mhm.
do, other kinds of coaching. There's lots of other kinds, and
Sure.
that's specifically it. So yes, you can just do sometimes a single time, or you can have an appointment, and maybe you contact again when there's a problem again in 6 months, and it's an hour on the
Great.
phone. That's
Good.
it.
So, well, thank you so much. I mean, we covered a
Thank
lot.
you.
We covered ideas
Yeah,
that people can do. We can, and it always, why does it always boil down to that we have to be the grown up? Like it
I
always seems to be that's
know.
always the
Well,
answer. We start by wanting to change our kids, but
I know. Yeah, it really starts I know, it starts
yeah,
with I don't like that answer either, but
yeah.
if parents can have that mindset, things are gonna go much more smoothly.
Fantastic. So, well, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Looking forward to again in the comments. Please leave any questions, and we'll be back with another Mom to Mom soon to answer all of your parenting questions and health and needs. So,
That's right.
thanks,
Thank
Margot.
you, Deanna. Thanks, everybody.
Sure. Bye
Bye.
bye.